Okay, so today we're going to talk about the why and how to remove a Model A head. Now you might wonder, why would you remove a Model A head? Well, if you want to take it off. But for instance, if you're rebuilding an engine, you want to take the head off because you're going to work on valves and everything in there. So you'd want to take the head off. Sometimes we put on an aftermarket head, maybe a higher compression head, so you want to increase the horsepower of the engine, so you want to take the head off. And other repairs, if you had a damaged water pump, for instance, and you had to remove the head or something. But then also, then probably the most important, usual thing is that you've got a blown head gasket. Now the head gasket is what goes between the head and the block. And so we want to take the head off and replace that gasket. We'll talk about that. So now, how would you know if you had a blown head gasket? Well, there's ways to test for it. One of the ways that we test for it is called a sniffer. Now this goes down in the radiator. We take this fluid and we fill it up just up to this line. So we put some fluid in there. This test fluid will turn color if there's any combustion gases in the air, in the water jacket. So we're going to take this, we're going to slip this in the radiator. This coil it makes it a little more difficult. So we want to put this down in the radiator, take this and suction, and we're going to suck up some fumes from the water jacket. And this fluid in here then will change color. So if that goes to a green or a yellow, that indicates that there are fumes from the combustion in with the water. So that would indicate that you have a blown head gasket, because that's the only way that could get in there is through a blown head gasket. Another thing that we can do, we can put this leak tester on, and what it does, it tests for the compression, and it tests for if the compressions if it'll stay up under compression or if it leaks down. So you have a little adapter. So you put the adapter in and stick this in, and you're going to hook this up to a compressor, and you're going to pump this up, and you're going to pump up the pressure, and you're going to watch it and see if it stays. Now you have to do this on the compression stroke where both valves are closed. So you rotate the engine until you're under the compression stroke. If you put the pin in, find number 1 top dead center, then you can test this number 1 cylinder and then sequence down through. You can test each one. And so you're going to pressurize this and then watch it and see if how long it will stay up. You're not going to get, it's not going to be full compression all the time, because, any engine will probably leak down. But anyway, you can test for compression, and that'll tell you different things. If you pressurize it and then you listen to your carburetor, if it's leaking through the intake valve, you can usually hear it hissing in the carburetor. If it's exhaust valve, you can hear in the exhaust. So you can kind of tell more about it as you run the tests with this tester. Now, obviously, one of the things you could watch, if your engine is missing and not running right, you can sometimes check each spark plug and see if you can short out a spark plug and see if it's making if that's what's the difference. So you can do just some visual testing. Obviously, if it's blown out through the side, you can actually you can see that. So there's different ways of telling what's going on in the engine. One of the ways you can tell what's going on is if they have water in the oil. That's a dead giveaway, because if you have water in the oil, it means that you have the head gasket is blown and there's water leaking out of the water jacket into the cylinder and down into the oil. Then of course the water will turn kind of a yellowish color. So those are the reasons that you would want to pull the head. So now I want to talk about how you're going to pull the head. An interesting way that we would pull the head, I'll take these out. And what we're going to do, we're going to check and see. We're going to take a screwdriver, reach in, and we're going to feel in there, and we're going to turn the engine until we can feel either number 2 or number 3 is at the top, which would mean that 1 and 4 then are down. Be careful when you do this, because obviously you can scratch things, and you can also jam the screwdriver in there. So all you're looking for is you want to feel that cylinder, feel that piston to see if it's all the way up. So if that's up, so what we're going to do, we're going to take a piece of rope. Now this is what we used to call clothesline rope. Just a cloth rope, 12 feet long. We tie a knot in the middle. Then we're going to proceed to insert the rope down in. Now remember, we had this cylinder is number 1 and number 4 are down. So we're going to run that rope in, and we're going to fill that cylinder with this rope. And the reason for the knot is because we want to get the same amount of rope in both sides. So if we get the same amount in both sides, we'll get even pressure, and it'll pop the head up. You can do the same thing, a similar thing, where you can run the engine, or at least turn it over with compression and have it, but in that case, what it does, it pops off, it'll lift only the one cylinder that is under compression. In that case, if it lifts it crooked, it's a little harder to get lifted off. So that's why we want to put the rope in so that it's equal amount on both sides. That's enough so anyway, so you can see. And now when you turn the engine over, now we're going to turn the engine over. Yeah, see it lifted the head right up. Now all it does is just, using the rope trick, it just breaks the head free. So it doesn't lift too much, so now you have to work the head off otherwise. That's the rope trick. Works very good. Works good on say a well-built engine. If you take an older engine that's been sitting around and rusted up, you may not be able to pull it off. The engine, of course, has to be able to rotate, so you can't have an engine frozen up to do this. This is a commercial puller. You can use this to lift the engine we're going to screw in. It comes with these adapters. Screw that in the spark plug holes, numbers 2 and 3. Drop this on, and I think one of them is bent. So yeah. So now that comes down. You take the nuts off the head, and this comes down and sets on the top of the studs. Now, number 8 stud sometimes is longer. Well, usually it's longer because there's a clamp that goes under that nut to hold your ignition cable. So this stud will be a different length. If it's longer, this foot is cut off shorter than this foot to accommodate that longer stud. If it's not longer, if it's the same as the others, then you have this little piece that goes in and takes up the difference. So you place that on. Now we put a couple of flat washers on. Put these nuts on here. Now when we tighten those, you can see what and now you can see that the head is starting to lift off the block. So that we're lifting up on the head through here. We're pushing down on the stud here. So we can only get this head up by how much stud there is sticking up above the head. So that's the commercial way of doing it. So we have several different head gaskets. This has the fire ring around the edge of the cylinder and around the valves. And then this is the separation between the two cylinders, between the 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. This is for the usual blow. They'll blow between here. So you want to make sure that you get the torque down very accurately. So this is just a simple, inexpensive, well, I won't say how inexpensive, but it's the lowest price one. Then we have the original style copper gasket. This is copper coated, and originally it was asbestos between the two coppers. It has the fire rings, that all is the same. So this, basically they're the same units, just one's copper coated, or copper clad, I guess would be the term for it. This is a more common one. This is a maybe more modern one. It has a seal built in. I don't know if you can see the red in here. So it has a seal embedded in the gasket itself. Now on the other ones, you might use a spray, a gasket sealer. But on this one, it specifically says for you to do not use the gasket sealer on this gasket. One of the things that came up was we had some problems with head gaskets, and people were using this head gasket, so it got blamed for some problems that really weren't its fault. What was happening was, after a number of years, the head will get taken off, resurfaced, and they become thinner. That increases your compression and increases your horsepower, but it does it does get thinner, then this stud, number 8 stud, on the aftermarket, they're making the stud, and the threads were not as far down the stud. That, coupled with the fact that some people would leave off the clamp that holds your ignition cable, and when they do, the combination of the thinner head, threads not going down quite as far, and no clamp, when you torque the nut down, it reached the bottom of the threads before you had your adequate torque, and so you didn't have that torque. And that's in this area right in here. So since this area was not torqued and this is a weak area, the gasket would blow. So it's not the gasket's fault. So I just want to make sure if you have any doubt about it, if you want to leave that clamp off that holds your ignition cable, replace it with a washer, because you need that nut to not run out of threads. So now, if you have a head that's really stuck on, you can't, maybe you only get it up a little bit, but you can't get it off. That's what happens when things get all rusty in here. So what you can do, we have this, you can take this plate, you can use this is a steel plate, or you can use like a piece of 3/4 inch plywood, or you can use a piece of 2x12. 2x12 is not as good because you could split. The plywood would be better, or of course you can use the steel. Now what you're going to do, we're going to put this on. We're going to put some threaded rods in each spark plug hole, and we're going to put some longer pieces of, and what we're going to use is carriage bolts, because you can just go to the store, buy a carriage bolt that is threaded all the way. Okay, what we have here, we're going to put these posts in the spark plug holes, but in order to do that, we have to neck down the size of the spark plug so that we can put this adapter on the end, so we can put this 1/2 inch threaded rod in. The way we do that is we take a spark plug. This happens to be a C4, or you can use a 3X, any one of the spark plugs. This is what's the Model A size, but what you can do, and I've already loosened it, of course, so you can take this top, take this out. Now you can take the ceramic out, and so now you have a nice adapter. And it's just the right size, so you can thread it to 1/2 inch, and I used 1/2 inch, 13 threads per inch. And then, so now you can screw that adapter onto this rod. Now the length of this rod is not important, but you buy the rod is in a 3-foot length, and we need 4 of them, so that ends up 9 inches a piece. So that's how they ended up that length. But you screw this onto the rod, then you screw a nut down against it, and just put figure tight is probably okay. Now we can take that, screw that into the spark plug hole. Helps you if you get them in straight. So we'll screw that in. Now notice when I threaded that, I didn't get it quite straight, so you'll notice it's off a little bit. That's okay. So we'll just adjust it until it's in the right, in whatever position we want. So we want to set these up so that they're equal, and we're going to take this plate, and we're going to set this plate Okay, now what we've done, we've taken these 7/16, they're carriage bolts. And the reason you use carriage bolts, well, two reasons. One, you can buy carriage bolts that are threaded all the way. A regular bolt would only be threaded part way. We want to thread it all the way because we're going to run the nut up to the bottom side. And an advantage of the carriage bolt then is if we need to, we can put a 7/16 wrench on the square shoulder and we can hold that to tighten it. We don't need to right now because the finger tight is okay. So we've got the plate and we put in 4 5-inch piece of carriage bolts. Then we're going to set this on, and each one of these carriage bolts will fit on top of one of these studs. Now to help in that process, we're going to take some 1/2-inch plastic tubing and drop over each one of these studs so that these will line up, and that tubing will help us line up. Then we can drop this down there, and now we should be sitting right on top of those studs. So we're set up. Now you can adjust them so that they'll, let's see, so if we get one a little too high, we can adjust that down. So we want to be fairly level. Now we're going to take a 6-inch carriage bolt and we can put that along with its tube. We can put that on with a washer and a nut. This might take you a few minutes, but it's a whole lot easier than trying to pry that head off any other way. So we're going to set that carriage bolt on the end of the stud and run the threads up underneath. Now we want it to be level, so we're looking at getting it level. I want to back that off a little bit, bring that down, and then we're going to continue that for each one of the studs around the top. Then we're going to put a nut on each one of these, what we could call them, risers. And I suppose it would be somewhat advisable to put a washer on, or not. Well, if you're using a wooden plate, you should have a washer. With this steel plate, it's not as necessary. Now we've got it set up. First thing we do is we set up these 4 center ones so that they're set up and lined up. That gives us our height. We need this height depending on how high we're going to lift the head, how far up we have to bring the head before we can get it loose. So we want some distance. So now if you take a bolt and lay it in here and check the height of each one of them, because we want to get it kind of level, so we get it level with the head. So we've set up these 4, and that gives us our distance. Now we're going to set these up, and it's going to run them up underneath so that they tighten up against the stud. and they're held around the stud with this little plastic piece. Now they're lined up, so we're level. Now we start in, and we can tighten up one of these. So now we start tightening these up. And as we tighten these, when we tighten these four, they are pulling up on the head, and these are pushing down on the stud. And so that gives you the difference, and it will actually draw the head right up. And these will actually go through the head down into the hole in the head. That's why they have to be 7/16 rather than 1/2 inch, because they're going to go into the stud hole in the head as we bring the head up. So then we just start tightening. Now as you tighten, that causes others to become loose. But as you tighten, you'll get to a point, maybe depending on how tight the head is, what the problems are, you may have to tighten all four of them. If you do, you want to be pretty much the same on all of them. Bring all of them up just the same amount, and that will bring the head up evenly. You don't want to cock it. You don't want to bring one of them up too high. So you just want to, you've got everything all set to keep them level, and then you just bring that up, and it'll just bring the head right up so that it'll go around these carriage bolts. So yeah, alternatively, you could go through and you could tighten each one of these carriage bolts. But then you're going to end up having the same thing anyway. So it's a lot easier to bring these up than it is to bring these up. And of course, that's also the reason that we put these in, and then we put a nut down against the adapter so that the stud doesn't turn, and when we turn the nut on here. So by putting this nut on that and just finger tight, then when you go to turn this nut, the stud won't turn. So anyway, that's how you remove a head that is giving you some trouble. We've had everything from using hydraulic presses to actually cutting the head in pieces, trying to get them off. But this way, so far we haven't found any head we couldn't take off with this method. So it takes a little while to set up. So the first thing you do, of course, try turning the engine over take the nuts off, turn the engine over with the starter, and that'll free it. If that doesn't work, and the disadvantage of that is that it's going to bring just one cylinder up, is going to under compression, and so it'll lift it a little crooked. So then if we use the rope trick, where we put the rope in, that brings up 2 cylinders, so it'll bring it up evenly. Still only brings it up the height of however much rope you put in. Then we have the commercial lifter, but again, this only brings the head up by however much of the stud is sticking up above the head. Once you bring that down to where this is flush with the head, that's as far as you can go. The advantage here, of course, is you can hook a cherry picker onto it and give you some added lift, although sometimes that just lifts the whole engine. So anyway, there are difficulties, but these are different ways you can try to pull the head off. And then you can use this plate. And again, this plate could be plywood. If you use plywood, you need some washers, but you can, and it takes a while to set up, but a lot faster than trying to pry that head off in any other way, and you're not going to damage anything. You aren't going to damage, you start reaching in with crowbars and stuff, you can damage valves, you can scratch the surface of both the head and the block. So this works out really pretty good. There is a tool for taking these studs out, so you can use a half-inch drive wrench, but since we don't have one, you can use a pipe wrench. So if you put the pipe wrench on here to get a good bite, then take a cement drill. A cement drill is a drill that hammers a star drill into cement, and it's done by pounding on that star drill. So we're going to put that on here, and it will pound on the end of the stud, and then we put pressure on it with the pipe wrench and just put steady pressure on it, and as it pounds in, it'll help loosen that, and that's one way to get a stud out. We have pretty good luck with that technique. The hammering technique is very good. Now there's other ways. Obviously, heating and cooling is a good way to break it loose. There are penetrating solutions. One of them is transmission fluid and acetone 50-50. That's a good one to soak it with. Plus, you want to heat it. If you heat the stud, then the stud will expand, and then when it cools, it'll shrink down again, and maybe it'll loosen it up. We've even done where you heat up the block and then take a paper cup with dry ice in it and a hole in the bottom, and you can use the paper cup so you don't have to touch the dry ice. Slip that down over the stud, cool the stud with the block hot, and try and turn it out. There's many ways to do this, probably as many ways as there are people, none of which are foolproof. So occasionally you break a stud. So in order to get a broken stud out, what we're going to do, put in a couple of studs just for alignment purpose. Drop a head on here for your alignment. Now take a length of what we would call 1/4-inch pipe, just a nipple. We take that, put it in the lathe, and turn the body down for a certain length. We want that just to where that will fit in and set on so that we're setting on the block now. So now with that in, that will align us, because it's important when we're going to drill that broken stud out, that we drill it in the center. We don't want to damage the threads if at all possible. So we make us a guide. Now we take a drill, and we want to set up the drill so we have 3/4 of an inch of the bit sticking beyond the end of the guide. Now we're going to put that in there, and that'll allow us to drill. Okay, so we're going to drill right through the center of that broken stud with the guide. And the reason it's 3/4 is because we don't want to drill beyond the end of that broken stud. So now once we've drilled that in the center, now we take the head off. Now we take an easy out, and there's several things to do. First of all, if you heat this, heat it very good even put some WD-40 or other solvents down through the hole. Light it, it'll flame up, so be careful. You want to get that hot, so you want to get this whole area temperature up. Now you take the easy out and you put it in some dry ice. The freezer is fine, gets down to 0, but the dry ice will get it even colder. So if you get this easy out nice and cold, now pick it up, not with your fingers, but pick it up with maybe a pair of pliers. Pick it up, drop it down in there. Now tap the end of it, and the easy out being cold will shrink the broken stud, and then it will allow you to unscrew it, and you can actually take the broken stud out. It's not always that easy, but you get the idea that the heating and then cooling and drilling in the center so that you don't damage the threads.